Greetings, grasshoppers. Hold on to your goggles because today we might end up flying through the air. My name is RJ Redden. If you don't know me already, well, I encourage you to get in touch. This today, right here, is going to be a fabulous episode of the quest for epic engagement. I have invited somebody. You know what? I've invited a former military paratrooper to come talk to us today. Why did she do this? They ask. Simple. This message is completely unignorable if you are an entrepreneur in today's world. Personal development ain't just about buying in a $20,000 program. Sometimes you find it in the unlikeliest of places. And that is why I have invited John McGlothlin to come and talk to us, author of a book called How to Deal with Damn Near Anything, The Paratrooper's Guide to Life. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me for the gracious introduction. The book is slightly less than $20,000, so I've tried to make it more approachable than some other options out there apparently are.
Well, and we were introduced, someone introduced us, and I was just fascinated with your message because somehow, in somewhere out there, in all of our preparation for life, we miss personal development. And you go to great lengths to discuss that in your book. What made you write the book, first of all?
Well, it was realizing that this gap existed in the first place. So I did 9 years as a full-time soldier. And then that's about halfway through a standard military career. So it's a natural inflection point. There's actually some administrative boxes you have to check at that point, some decisions you have to make. So I thought, you know what? No, I'm going to go part-time. There's some other things I want to do. They passed the GI Bill. So I left the full-time military then after, like I said, about 9 years. And I was a normal person again, aside from, 1 weekend a month and a little bit a year of continuing military commitment. And over time, I did not realize this immediately. My immediate transition was a little awkward in terms of I brought a level of sarcasm and profanity that was not always a good fit for my new environment. And only after a few years did I realize that the differences between military and civilian life are more numerous and more interesting and more useful than just one involves more danger, one involves more tanks, one involves more war. It really is about the environment the military has created and the way that it fosters development in a myriad of different ways. And the things that I found most useful that I was taking with me from my time in the military to my time as a normal person were not the things I heard in the books or the movies or the TV shows that I saw. All of those things, there's reason all those other stories get told, and they should always be told, but they're not the most useful. So I thought there was a gap to fill, and first I thought maybe I'll write something for law students because I went to law school on the GI Bill. That was part of my getting out of the full-time military process, was via the GI Bill. And then, I had some people encourage me to broaden the scope a bit, and I did. So that's how the book came to be.
Nice. Maybe I should also ask you, can you give me a brief history of John McGlothlin, the peanut shell version across time so people have the full background?
Sure. So I'll work backwards. When I said I was going to join the military, it was after 9/11, right after I'd graduated from undergrad. And everyone who knew me was alarmed. And they were alarmed because I was known as being an individual, not a contrarian necessarily, but somebody who wasn't seen as a good fit for a formal or hierarchical top-down type of environment. But it turns out I was a good fit for the military because it is not nearly as much of that as people think. But people were not wrong to be worried necessarily. They weren't wrong to think that. So they thought that because I had always been, originally I was a math kid actually, which is not always the best thing to show your team skills because it's a very individual pursuit, much of the time at least. And I had grown up with my grandma, so I was kind of a free range kid, didn't have a ton of structure, didn't need a ton of structure. I didn't get in a lot of trouble, but I also I was used to having a certain amount of freedom to do things my own way. And that had always been a defining characteristic. And that's why people were worried about me joining the military. So the very short version is grew up with my grandma, a little bit of a free range kid, a little bit of a wandering type, doing my own thing. and somehow made that work in the military after going to undergrad at, I grew up near 1/3 in Texas, 2/3 near DC in Northern Virginia, and then went to Florida State University for undergrad, had an amazing time, didn't go to class nearly as much as I should have. And after that decided, okay, 9/11 has happened. I want to learn Arabic in the military, offered an amazing way to do so.
Excellent. Yeah, and then 9 years full-time service. And then you came out, went to law school, and now you're out in DC.
Yep, I am now. I'm actually temporarily back in the military full time, doing whistleblower protection. So I should say anything I say is my opinion, has nothing to do with Department of Defense, the government, anybody else. This is all me. You hear something dumb? It was my dumb idea. It was not the government's dumb idea. So let me emphasize that. But yes, so I'm temporarily back. I'm a JAG officer now, usually part time, but right now full time.
Nice.
But the book represents the time before that, the knowledge that I gained from just being a regular old person and living a regular old life.
Nice. Well, and as entrepreneurs, we learn, like when 2020 happened, we were all talking a lot about resilience, develop resilience, and everybody had a course on that for a while, and folks studied it. But when I read your book, you really focused on five traits that were a little bit different than that. Can you go into the five traits that you talk about in your book?
Sure. So I had to distill it into something understandable, right? If people can't take something useful away from a book like this, then I'm not really doing them any service. You can agree with something and then forget it 10 minutes later if there's not any kind of structure there. So the five traits are what I chose. And I picked them based off of what I saw was lacking in the other paths that people take that might otherwise lead them to development. That's basically work and school. And it's not that neither of those places care about you, it's that they have different goals. And the traits that I picked out were things that the military has to teach in order to be successful, that schools and jobs don't necessarily have to teach. And even if they wanted to, they wouldn't necessarily be good at it. And especially because people don't necessarily look for those things from their job or their school anyway. Sometimes we want to be left alone a little bit, besides whatever commitment we have. So the first of the traits, should I go through all five now? Or do you want me to just get started and go from there?
Let's get started and go from there. We're a relaxed conversation.
No, that's why I felt comfortable asking. So the first trait is self-awareness. And the comparison I make is it's like you put your directions into Google Maps, but if your GPS doesn't know where you are right now, it doesn't know how to take you where you need to go. And I have found that a lot of folks, it is, and one thing I did when I wrote this book, I was like, the last thing I want to do is write a crappy book. I'd rather just not write one. And I looked into a lot of the research because I have my anecdotal knowledge and experiences, but if it doesn't match up with what rigorous study of these things says, then I should at least take a look at why I think what I think. And unfortunately, well, fortunately for me wanting to write the book, unfortunately for development, people aren't self-aware by and large. It's not to say everybody gets a 0 out of 100 in it, but very rarely do people get high marks in it. And the more successful they get, the worse they are at being self-aware. So that is why I picked it as the first trait, because it enables people to have an accurate picture of themselves. And it can be tough to change. It can be tough to develop, but it is a lot less tough if you're trying to develop the right things. So that was the idea, is give people a look at how the military develops self-awareness and why it is so important to develop, and why an overt positive effort needs to be made to do so.
And one of the things that struck me a little bit is that you defined self-awareness, part of it as a willingness to be honest with yourself and your peers about where you're at. And I know that, gosh, when I first worked with entrepreneurs, this is 20 years ago. I'm going out to entrepreneurs and helping them with computer triage basically, and some marketing things and all that. And one thing that I learned really, really quick was you don't ever say to an entrepreneur, "Do you understand?" Because the answer is always yes.
Hmm.
They do not want to look like they don't understand anything, even if they completely don't. So we really that self-awareness, that one is that honesty about, hey, sometimes I don't know where the F I'm going. Let's just be honest. And sometimes circumstances pound me there and I've got to react and come back from that. Self-awareness is so important, and honesty about where we're at is so important in entrepreneurial life.
No, because I think you see some of the same personality types in entrepreneurs that you do in lawyers in terms of they're go getters. I'm trying to make something happen out here, like a lot of energy, a lot of ideas, a lot of drive, and that's great. And I don't mean that, and I mean that 100% genuinely, but it comes with downsides. And I want to emphasize to people you don't have to master self awareness. You don't have to go meditate in a cave for a month until you have this Zen like mastery over your entire personality. The good thing about people by and large not being great at this is that you don't have to get you have to get a lot better to be ahead of the pack. And it's unfortunate, but take advantage of that. And one example I give is so, like I mentioned, I get out of the full time army and I have a much different approach to things than most people at law school do. And there's a clash there. And so, what I did was one of my classmates, she was engaged to a former Marine. And we knew each other. We were friendly, but we didn't like hang out outside of class. And I asked her after class one day, I was like, can I ask you a favor? And she's like, sure. And I was like, every like couple of weeks, can I just have like 5, 10 minutes to see how I'm adjusting? Because I know the military thing that I'm coming from is not the same place I am. And she got it immediately because she had enough context. And I tried to be very diligent about honoring that, not coming up after every class, every conversation I had, but doing it every couple of weeks and then getting some feedback. And it was great because I didn't need to reorient my entire life around the idea of being self aware. If you just have a broad understanding of an area you can improve in and find one or two sources of some nuggets that you can use, that by itself can yield great rewards.
And that's not very much. That's
No,
not a huge effort. That's not meditating in a cave. And 360 reviews. I mean, holy moly. Don't give me one of those. I'll be afraid of it. But picking up that as a value, something that we're learning about all the time. That was fascinating to me about your book.
well, good. Thank you. I'm glad that was useful.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the second one, my friend.
All right. So the second trait out of 5 is initiative. And one of the things that the military is very good at is encouraging people to make decisions with incomplete information. And there's some different phrases for this. Analysis paralysis is the famous studies of when they put like 25 jars of jam of different types in a supermarket, nobody bought anything. People just look at all the jars and be like, I'm never going to figure out which one's best. We put 5 in front of them and they're much more likely to actually make a decision. And the military is excellent at that because once you're self-aware, like, okay, for me, I really needed to work on my bluntness and my people skills. And I wasn't like making a ton of enemies. That's the thing, though, is that's dangerous. If something is a giant, obvious flaw, then you're probably going to be forced to address it on some level. But if it's just bad enough to limit your potential, you may not actually be forced to do it. So that's where you have to take the initiative. Your hand will not always be forced to address a lot of the things that could do you the most good. Because most people are not walking disasters. Most people are somewhere in the middle ground. They got strengths, they got weaknesses, they got unrealized potential, but they're also not at the end of their rope all the time either, even if people can have moments like that. So that's where initiative is important and being proactive enough to take the knowledge you gain from self awareness and then do something with it.
Well, and part of that too is the willingness to experiment and fail sometimes. Because if you're making decisions based on incomplete information, then sometimes it's going to all go down the tubes. And being willing to put yourself out there is that's a tough one. That's a tough one for a lot of people that I know because I don't want to make mistakes in public. I don't want to get bullied on the internet. I don't want to, I mean, there's a whole lot of I don't want to in there. Have you ever run into that situation in your own personal development?
Oh, absolutely. It's funny. After writing a book, what do you do? Right? There's a whole set of expectations. And I was in the awkward position of enjoying my daily job and life already. So I didn't want to replace my current life and personality with being an author or an influencer or any of that sort of thing. But I know that to some people out there, that looks like I didn't do anything else, right? That I half-assed it or something like that. Because I'm used to someone writing a book and then going on a 50 city tour or making it their entire professional personality after that. But I liked my job. I liked my life. This was something I thought I could also offer. So yeah, occasionally I do worry. I'm like, do people just see these book efforts and think that it's just like a failed hobby? Like, and maybe some people do. But at the end of the day, I have to make the right decision for my professional and personal goals and the balance that I'm seeking between my main career and between book related efforts. And I have to make sure that I'm not letting fear of embarrassment keep me from making certain decisions. And it's okay if people think that something negative that's untrue. That's going to happen sometimes. Now, I don't ignore that. I definitely look for ways, hey, could I be doing more? Could the things I be doing be a little different? So I don't ignore that feedback, but I don't act reflexively out of a desire to prevent it either. Somebody somewhere thinks that I am a failure at this, and that is okay. And
Yeah.
that is probably how it will always be. I'm sure people think Harry Potter books suck, and that's before the author decided to go off on some unnecessary tangents about parts of society, right? So there's always going to be somebody out there like that, and you have to put that in its proper context and not let that stop you from taking the initiative to try new things.
Absolutely. So we've got self-awareness, initiative. What's the next one?
The next one is adaptability. It is very easy to fall in love with the plan, right? And whatever the plan was supposed to accomplish, that kind of goes away, right? So at the end of the day, the plan was to accomplish something, and you might need a different plan, and that is okay. And in fact, if you're making zero adjustments, you're either some kind of savant or you're ignoring feedback. So the military is there's I stole one from the Marines for this. This is not an Army paratrooper thing, but the real Marine, I'm gonna mess up their terms. Say Marines out there, I apologize. I don't know if it's a motto. The real Marine Corps thing is Semper Fi, right? But the informal one is Semper Gumby. Their way of saying always be flexible. You want to talk about a group of people not known for their, or people who are known for being like robotic. Marines have that stereotype more than anybody in the military, and yet still, they're the ones who are like Semper Gumby, always be adaptable. Things will change on a dime. You are dealing with forces you don't control. My unit was supposed to go to Iraq, and I went there as an Arabic linguist, in part because we were going to Iraq. And then one day we were not going to Iraq anymore. We were going to Afghanistan for reasons, right? Not don't need to get all the reasons here, but obviously geopolitical this and logistics that. There were all these different reasons this happened. And then one day, like, we're just not going there. Okay, what good can we do now? The things that we were going to accomplish, we're going to have to try to accomplish somewhere else. How do we adapt our strategy for this new environment? So it's not always going to a different country, but sometimes it is. And it is a good adaptability can be small. It doesn't have to be wholesale reinvention. The same thing we mentioned about self awareness, but it does need to exist. And it's better if it's done. That was an example of being reactively adaptable, right? But you want to look for ways to be proactive about it too, and not wait for your hand to be forced, and try to anticipate things when you can.
And of all of the 5 principles, I feel like entrepreneurs are the best married with this one, because smaller companies, smaller organizations, uh, no less important, but smaller, we have the ability to turn on the dime when try to make some changes at Google. See you later. Good luck with that. Let me know how it comes out because that's too big of a ship to turn around ever. And so for us, adaptability to brand new circumstances. Everybody's talking about AI with good reason, and so we can, I think, with regard to who we are and what we do, we can be adaptable. But sometimes I feel like the sticking point with adaptability is the personal stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
It's hard
Uh,
because people can get known, like if you're an entrepreneur and you're known as the successful person at this thing. Well, like on the one hand, maybe you can use that credibility to adapt and try something new. But on the other hand, will that be viewed in a way that you don't want to be viewed? And it's a delicate balancing act. So I have empathy for folks that are in a position where adapting means giving up something that they have grown attached to, personally or professionally. But that is on some level, at some point, going to be necessary in order to move forward.
that's the truth. And this is really, I mean, this is really about moving forward. As you were talking about in your book, a lot of people stagnate. We get past a certain point, and it's just like, okay, day after day now. We don't have to or aren't expected to maybe grow as much, but that's almost never true in the lives of the entrepreneurs that I know. We have constantly got to be looking out there and leaping over tall buildings with a single bound. So yeah. All right, number four.
All right,
Four.
number four is efficiency. And I think this is an important one to go against typecasting, because as much as I love my fellow military types that have written books, a lot of times those books are about intensity. Like, get up at 3 a.m., do 1 million push ups, run an ultra marathon until you almost die, and then you will discover your true self. And I have found that for most people, they do not need more intensity. They're not going to intensity their way out of whatever challenge they're dealing with in life. What you need is to be efficient. You have to figure out where you can put your limited time and energy so that it gives you the most benefit. And this was the biggest surprise to me going into the military. I kind of knew that adaptability thing, and I kind of knew the initiative thing about the military. And I think it was still useful to figure out how they did that, especially because the military hoovers up people of all different types, of all different skill sets from all different parts of the country. All right. And yet still we managed to teach these things to people. But the efficiency thing was a surprise. I did not expect that. I expected what everybody gets. You're going to get yelled at. You got to go maximum hardcore, pedal to the metal all the time. And that's just not true. And don't get me wrong, I should make this disclaimer. The military is a gigantic organization. We have morons. We have people who are bad at all 5 of these traits. Like, there's no guarantees in life, right? We do our best. There's a joke that, like, somehow 10% of people will slip through the most rigorous selection process you can have. You're still going to end up with some people who are like, how did you get here? You are bad at all of this. All right, so that happens. But efficiency, my drill sergeant in basic training, who's going to be more intense than a drill sergeant, right? They are the literal poster children for intensity. They immediately said, one of the first things they ever said to me was, work smart, not hard. And it took me a second. Luckily, I'm not supposed to say anything back, so I had some time to think. But I was like, did I hear that right? Did I just get told to not work? And it was to the whole group. It wasn't to me individually. Like, did we just get told not to work as hard by this guy? And we did, because motivation wasn't the problem. And I think that's going to be true for a lot of folks in the entrepreneurial space. There's a lot of safer routes to take in life than being an entrepreneur or being in the military or any other type of career that involves that level of commitment. But the danger is that you will burn yourself out. And there's always more you can do. And if you're always focusing on what else you could be doing instead of how you could be doing things better or more efficiently, you are going to burn out eventually. So, and this was absolutely true of law students. It's true of a lot of like high performer type, aspiring type of careers. But yeah, the military does a surprising job at teaching people to be thoughtful. Like, when you're supposed to go, you're supposed to go hard, but you're not supposed to go hard all day, every day. And mastering that ebb and flow of things is absolutely crucial to becoming the best version of yourself.
And to me, the best business owner I can be, because I was absolutely convinced in my first few years of being in business that sticking to my desk
Yeah.
physically for 16 hours a day was a great way to make good business and build a solid foundation. No, it was not. I was told in a very firm manner by my wife to get the hell away from my desk. And
Important to have those checks and balances.
Oh,
Those
checks and
people in your
balances
ear.
are good. Yeah, well, and that efficiency, that one's hard. I deal with people, I'm an unconventional traction strategist, so I'm a marketer. It's so hard to know what's going to be efficient out there.
Yeah.
And when one of the problems about us is we're constantly looking forward. Never do we look at the people that we've already got and go, let's develop this bunch.
Yeah.
So it's a different kind of thing altogether, but that efficiency is so important. Just really, one of the touchstones of this five principle thing that you've got going on here.
Well, and a
Um,
quick sidebar, you mentioned that just sort of approach to how do we develop the people we have instead of like finding new people. One of the first things I did, hadn't been out of the full-time army a month yet. I went to South by Southwest. I met somebody who invited me there, and I was like, I'm in the army, I can't go. And then as soon as I got out, he's like, hey, you're not in the army anymore. Let's do this. Like, all right. So I go, and I go to obviously the movies and music were fun, but I go to the tech part, the entrepreneur part, and I go to this seminar, whatever it was, discussion. They're about like, are high performers worth it? High maintenance people who are also high performers, are the superstars that are pains in the ass worth it? And one thing that struck me wasn't necessarily the answer to that question. It was everybody treated these people like they were never going to change. Like, and the approach of the military of like, this person's a high performer, but they suck at this other thing, is to make them not suck at the other thing, or at least try. And that whole idea of we're going to develop whoever we have, we're going to make them the best version of who they can be. That just wasn't even on the menu
Yeah.
at this business development. It was just that people were treated as finished products. And at first I thought like, this is a bunch of like quitter talk. And then I came to understand more that like you're pushing against a lot of history when you're asking workplaces to do these sorts of things. And I've learned about how difficult mentorship programs are to do correctly and all the challenges that go into that. So I understood that mindset more. But that gap that mindset leaves of how you actually work with people to improve them in those areas, that gap was still there. I was a little more forgiving of why it was there, but it still persists, which, as I mentioned, is why I'm doing what I do.
Yeah, of course.
But that
Uh,
you reminded me of that story when you said, like, how do we train the people we have? That is a seemingly simple question that is often just off the menu in a lot of different workplaces.
Well, it is, and when we're thinking about, people, we wanna get a bigger crowd, we wanna get a bigger list, we wanna do all these things. How about connecting with the people that we have? How
Yeah.
about spending some time with them, or virtually spending some time with them that isn't gonna cost you money, but it's gonna help develop them just a little bit along the road? That to me, that part of it, that efficiency is, it raises so many questions about the way I do entrepreneurship. Um, and the last one is insistence. Tell me about insistence, John.
So it's probably the least familiar word to folks, insistence, out of the 5 traits. But the reason it is there and the reason it is last, and it is sort of the summation, you can look at them in any order, but there's a hopefully natural flow to the 5 of them. Insistence is the capstone. And the reason is it is about setting and enforcing boundaries and standards. And the world is the type of place that will eventually wear down your limits if you don't stick to those limits, whether it's people, often unintentionally, because most people who do this, they aren't like schemers that are trying to find ways to screw you over. They just won't necessarily respect your boundaries. And they will keep calling, they will keep emailing, they will keep whatevering until they get what they want. And you absolutely have to set boundaries and enforce them. And a lot of the research shows that there's a lot less effort there required than you might think. In fact, if people are just aware that there's a boundary, they don't even have to see it enforced on anyone. Just awareness that there's some kind of possible accountability will change people's behavior. Talk about people in the workplace. I just mentioned the type of person who's a high performer, but can trample on other people. That's exactly the type of person that will change their behavior if they know they could even possibly get checked. So that type of insistence is something that the military does probably the most uniquely good job out of all 5 of these of encouraging people to do. We have a lot of written down standards, right? And dense regulations, but there's a lot of norms that function just as strongly in terms of setting the rules for the environment that we're in. And I think that is something that is largely absent outside the military environment, but is an extremely, extremely core part of why I've been able to make that transition successfully. Just having that skill set of setting those boundaries, of upholding standards, is something that is personally fulfilling and professionally fruitful as well.
I love that one. Because basically it was like I read that one, I was like, oh, that word is new to me. But a lot, on the entrepreneur side, this we just, especially if we're new, we have trouble saying no.
Yeah,
Uh, and if you have trouble saying no and setting that boundary, then you're also gonna have trouble with the other side of it, which is upholding standards.
exactly.
Um, yeah. Oh, it's a
I remember the
terrible.
first freelance writing job I said no to. I felt like I had done something wrong. I was cheating myself. You know, you put that effort into getting paid to do it at all, and then you have to because circumstances get to a certain point. You're busy enough. It's not the right gig. It's not the right publication or person to work with, whatever it may be. Where you have to say no, and especially if people are hustling for a check, it can be hard to say no to a check. But you really have to put those things in context, and if you decide to take a short-term L in terms of who you're working with or what you're doing, that is necessary sometimes, but do it consciously. Don't find yourself regretting later that, oh, I didn't think this through. Because if the people who suffered in the military were not the ones that were suffering in the moment, it was the ones who weren't there for a reason. They just kind of joined for something to do. And then when rough waters hit, they didn't have any idea. They didn't have any greater standard they were upholding. But if people, and it can be, I want college money. It does not have to be democracy. It doesn't have to be an eagle in front of a flag with a national anthem playing in the background. Like, as long as you had a concrete reason that you could remember when it got tough, you were in good shape. So it's the same thing. Like, you may have to make a decision professionally as an entrepreneur that means long hours. That means working with somebody you don't want to. But just you have to know why you did it, which means you went through that analysis from the start. And you're there for a reason. You know what that reason is, and that allows you to keep going when times get tough.
Yeah. Well, and certainly, times get tough in entrepreneurship too. And like taking an L, you said take a short term L, short term loss on something. For me, it's occasionally I do, confront situations where, yeah, I know that this is not a great long term client for me, but I need to pay my people.
Yeah.
And so that means I need to get paid. And so here we go, but getting into that with eyes open as opposed to, oh, maybe it'll work out. We'll just,
Exactly.
uh,
Exactly. Because people will tend to, they don't want to take the L. So they'll convince themselves the L's not going to happen. Like, oh, this person will change their behavior. They'll respect this boundary I've set when they have shown no history of doing that. Like, no, they're not going to change. They're going to do the same crap to you. Is it Scorpion and the Frog, that old parable? Like, it is their nature. It is not going to change. But if
yeah.
you're ready for that, you can at least, yes, it will still be unpleasant, but it will be the smallest amount of unpleasant it possibly can be because you'll have prepared yourself as much as you can.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. And a lot of this, and if you excuse the analogy, because I realize how terrible it is, but a lot of these skills seem to be being able to rise up and look at stuff from 30,000 feet, to being able to, from that self-awareness at the beginning. Hold please, my dog wants out of this room.
No problem. I just talked about adaptability, right? It'd be hypocritical of me to have a problem now.
Oh
That's
my
the
gosh.
tough thing about writing a book is that you then have to try and live by it. It's like, man, I really thought I could get away with being a worse at these things before I wrote them all down.
Oh my gosh, that is true. Uh yeah, the you seem to have to, especially the self-awareness one, where yeah, I know I set these goals at the beginning of the year. Where am I at right now? What can I do today? What's not working, instead of just, what's working or what we hope to work. We always want to go toward the hope, I always want to live in the dream, but reality calls. And when you have these types of skills that you've been mentioning, it's so much easier to be adaptable to who you need to be in that moment.
And a lot of these traits too are recognizing your strengths and doubling down on those. Because, and I want to emphasize that because development, there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's not all like, I man, I suck at this. I need to suck less at this. Like, a lot of it is drill sergeants spend a shocking amount of time building people up. Everyone's used to them yelling, right? Because they've seen it in movies. And yes, it happens. And it happens for a reason and it works. And the military is very thoughtful about when the yelling happens. It is not some do whatever type of environment. But drill sergeants spend a lot of time building people up who are more capable than they realize. So a lot of self-development, even inside the military, is about embracing and acknowledging things you are better at than you realize, and then going through those other traits and making sure that's where you're spending time on. That's what you're actually focusing on, instead of what may be working for other people but isn't a good fit for you.
That's pretty incredible. That's pretty incredible. Never have thought of the military as a great personal growth development place, but you've changed my mind, John.
Thank you.
Um, and for those of you who have not read the book, super approachable, super, I mean, this is not an academic thesis, 75 pages of academically supervised footnotes. This is stuff that we as folks, civilians, entrepreneurs, this is stuff that we can take and incorporate into our own ways of managing our business. You've probably had this experience. I know you've had students. I've got clients. I've had students, and we run into that place where, we, this stuff is just not as accessible. I want to say that if you're thinking about reading this book and you're an entrepreneur and you're wanting to develop yourself without having to get into something, some great big crazy hairy program that may or may not give you anything by the time you get out, start learning these principles and starting to apply them in your daily stuff. You can grow, you can get better. You can get better at things that you never thought you could get better at. And that's the message that I got from you, John.
Well, thank you. I mean, I have a strong personality, and I would be a candidate to not change. So it is doable. And the military it was funny to loop it back. A lot of people worried because I had a strong personality that when I went into the military that I'd clash with people. But what I found was a lot of people who knew what the hell they were doing, and some people who didn't, but that's fine. And plenty of people who could serve as sources of feedback, sources of guidance. So yes, if change is possible for someone with my level of stubbornness, then it is possible for almost anyone.
That's good to hear, because I also am a strong personality and I'm also a hella stubborn.
Goes with the territory.
There you go. I do want to take a minute and thank you. You talked about being a double volunteer in your book. It's in the first couple of chapters there, and one was stepping forward to join the military in the first place, and then the other one was let's jump out of perfectly good planes, being a paratrooper, which I've designed our background today to be indicative.
I love that. I noticed that. I would figure that didn't just come off the shelf randomly.
Oh no, GPT is helpful and powerful, and I did design that just for you. I think that this is a message that my people need to hear and incorporate. And I want to thank you for being a double volunteer. I know that the military, it can be a wonderful place to grow, but I also know that service sometimes demands stuff of which is hard to replace. And so thank you for being there. Thank you for doing that. And thank you for helping all of us be better, whoever we are and whatever we do. This book is awesome. Again, folks, How to Deal with Damn Near Anything, The Paratrooper's Guide to Life. Go get that thing. Y'all, Kindle, take a minute and learn how to improve in a way that helps you be able to handle damn near anything. Man, thanks for coming on. Any final words of wisdom for us?
No, thanks for having me. It was a joy to try and reduce a lot of random military thoughts and experiences into something digestible and helpful. So, one review said the book should be a little bit longer, and I was like, I'm okay with that ultimately. So, hopefully, it did end up in a place that's approachable and actually useful for people.
Awesome. All right, sir. Well, we're putting your link in the comments, and to all of you out there, an approachable guide to handle how to handle anything, and be back, same bot time, same bot channel next week. We'll be taking another quest into epic adventure. Until then, Hey, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I'll see you in a bot.